Welcome back to another video. I'm going to take you through a presentation I've prepared on how we established our profitable no-till market garden and everything that went into that and the directions we're going in the future. Before we get into it, please make sure to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. While we have a diverse mix of enterprises, pastured poultry, agroforestry, forest raised pigs, one of the backbones of the farm is the no-till market gardens, which comprise a total of just over half an acre of garden space. We set out to grow no-till market gardens on the farm from the get-go as a quick generating revenue source so that we could be living and working on the farm full-time from the get-go. We preferred no-till while we had experience in tillage-based systems prior to Wild East. We preferred this method because we wanted to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, petrol and diesel, and work in a system that is continually building soil and the soil microbiology as a function of growing vegetables rather than the two working against each other, as is very common in tillage-based systems. We were able to get started rapidly building out our first 40 beds in the first spring, just 2 of us on the farm, and gradually expanding from there. But one of the beauties of no-till is even with that cold, wet spring where we were building our first beds, we were able to plant and be harvesting within 8 weeks of setting up the gardens. And it was just in those first 8 weeks of sales that we repaid 100% of the materials investments to get the garden started. So we've cash flowed the business on the market garden quite well and been able to scale appropriately without growing too big to take immaculate care of the gardens. You can see we have very minimal weeds and the gardens produce very beautiful vegetables year-round. Now, I mentioned we have these other enterprises on the farm that also form the backbone. Agroforestry, mixed diverse plantings of fruit and nut crops for the longer term yield on the farm. We raised pastured broilers and turkeys for the holiday season, introducing high input fertility loads into the pastures that were tired when we arrived, and producing a beautiful, delicious product that is unlike anything any of our customers have ever tasted. We raise some elements of the farm on a homestead scale to provide for ourselves. We have a grazing flock of sheep that we raise to fill our own freezers and to be rotationally grazing the pastures. And we do the odd batch of pigs, essentially so that we can have a year-round supply of the best pork around, organic pork, and sell enough just for it to pay for itself. We're also increasingly growing as an educational site here at Wild East. The first several years, we've hosted farm tours, university classes, day courses with agricultural professionals, and this is a major long-term goal of the farm, is to take our example and be able to continue to educate the next generation of farmers. The deep compost method of no-till is one way of approaching no-till growing. We like it very much because, like I said, it's a very quick way to get started And you're immediately putting down loads of fertility into spaces that were potentially not the best to grow. We have very generally soggy clay soils on our farm as the baseline native soil. So by putting on 6 inches of compost at the beginning, we could plant directly into that and grow immediately. It also keeps an extremely beautiful, clean space. And the mulch not only acts as a high fertility growing medium, but also a very effective weed suppressant. So while we do weed, and there's no such thing as a weed-free market garden, it's absolutely a minimal element of our task list. We spend most of our time in the gardens harvesting and in post-harvest processing to get all of our food out to the customers, which is exactly where you want to be spending your time in the market garden, taking these beautiful vegetables and getting them ready for sale and selling them. We're able to do everything by hand, including transplanting, bed preparation. We establish these beds with the only real machinery input in the whole system. So at varying stages, in the first 2 years, we would cover crop a future plot after an initial tillage event. And then we'd tarp that cover crop to integrate those decaying plant roots into the soil and build off right on top of that. You can see in the photos here, the way we build the beds is we have a 12.5-foot frame, which is quite easy and light to move around as a single person. And it's set to the exact width and depth of the beds. And 12.5 feet because all of our beds are multiples of 25, or if you have that, 12.5. So we can dump buckets of compost directly into there, rake it flat, and then slide the frame down to continue building beds. The way we scaled the gardens on the farm, we started, as I mentioned, in the spring of 2023, our first year here, and we planted out and established 40 beds at 50 feet long, all oriented north-south. So in that first spring and summer, we were growing on just under a fifth of an acre. And that fall, we made more beds to continue expanding the gardens. Eventually, we got all of this space under cover in 4 caterpillar tunnels, and the space called for 100-foot beds here. So not all of our beds are standard length because we prioritized maximizing the space we had available to us for the market gardens over bed uniformity. And the way that it worked out in our context was having one block with 50-foot beds, one block with 100-foot beds, and the rest of the blocks with 75-foot beds was the most efficient use of space. That following spring, the beginning of our second season, we built out 16 more beds in a north-south orientation. And finally, last fall of 24, or I should say summer, and it was ready for planting in the fall, was the final addition, bringing us to about 0.6 acres, just over half an acre of total garden space, and right around 1/3 of an acre of plantable bed top. We have a lot of space on the farm. It's 44 acres, but for ease of workflow and proximity to infrastructure, we decided to lay out our gardens as close to farm center as possible and keep the footprint small as well. We've rapidly established and are continuing to establish perennial edges. Around the first gardens on the windward sides, we planted black willow cuttings that were pencil-sized in the spring of 2024. And here's some photos of us doing a thick, heavy pruning just the following summer, about 15 months later, where plants were 20 feet tall. This buffers the gardens against wind, which can be a major limiting factor for plant growth and a major cause of plant stress, as well as creating shady microclimates in our hot summer to be able to grow certain crops throughout the heat. This picture sums up basically our most important tools for the market gardens. While we have harvest knives and bins, this is essentially all we use to maintain our beds. There's broad fork for continually decompacting soil and incorporating organic matter into deeper layers of the soil. Here we have Johnny's tilther, which just does a light rotary tillage about 1 to 2 inches down to create a smooth, flat bed top. Johnny's bed rake, 30 inches wide, so that we can get a final pass on the bed, leaving it nice and smooth for transplanting or direct seeding. And finally, we've grown to really like Neversink's gritter. We have 3 heads. One comes with 2 row, there's 3 row and 4 row. And this is excellent for having extremely precise planting distances when transplanting. And we can crop plan around these 3 sizes and plan our seeding plan depending on how far apart plants are going. We know exactly how many to produce in the propagation space. I'm often asked what the most valuable tool, or one that I couldn't live without on the farm, is. And thus far in the short life of the farm, the front loader tractor bucket has saved all of our backs much wear and tear. It's saved us loads of time and has led to extremely efficient movement of heavy materials that we don't have to be wearing ourselves down, spending copious hours doing it manually. We utilize very simple infrastructure at this stage of the farm. We opted to get caterpillar tunnels for covered growing space in the early years, and we're able to produce really high quality summer crops, tomatoes and cucumbers and ginger, and continue growing through the shoulder seasons and deep into winter so that we can be one of the few gardens bringing fresh produce to the market all year round. We have simple modular walk-in coolers hooked up to CoolBot units, and we have 2 of these for the gardens. One is flexible for bulk storage of crops that may sit in storage for a bit longer, so things like daikon, radish, cabbage, or bulk carrots. And our other cooler, more frequent use, has a lot of greens coming in and out for market, so bringing stuff in immediately after harvest, labeling it, and then getting it out to the customers. We approach our crop plan very diligently. Shout out to Zach for putting together this system. And I just have an example here of one of the garden blocks and most of the year's plan for that garden block. So in this example, the North Gardens have 4 blocks, and each block has 4 beds. So there's 16 beds total in Northfield Gardens. And on the, I want to call it the x-axis, but going horizontally is temporal. So the first block is winter, moving into summer, into fall, and then back into winter. So you can see we have very specific plans of what's currently in beds, what is going next in beds, and how the successions work out so that we can translate this to our seeding plan and have successions throughout the year of all the different crops that we grow so that we can bring a consistent variety to market week by week. Oh, and I should just say, it looks somewhat complex perhaps, but this is all just done on Google Sheets using different color coding and labeling the different rows and columns according to our context. So you don't really need a fancy crop planning software. I think that in most cases those are unnecessary, and it's a cost that you don't have to depend upon. So while we grow year round, we also have a distinctly, or I should say, we have distinct breaks in our season. We rely heavily upon the spring and the fall because, in our context, those are the growing seasons in which it's frankly easiest to grow high volumes of really good food without as much pressure. And winter and summer, we still grow, but tone things down a bit. So you can see we pump out tomatoes in the tunnels, but in this center photo I have here, we put certain beds into cover crop in the summer. We found that the heat and the humidity and the insect and disease pressure in our climate is quite significant, and the heat pressure on us is also significant. So we try to produce enough throughout the year that we can afford to take a bit of downtime and utilize cover crop in the summer, bringing down our workload whilst continuing to build active, healthy soil. In the winter in the tunnels on cold nights, we use row cover in the tunnels to keep things extra warm and cozy. And this enables us to bring non-damaged produce to market in January, February, and thus far haven't needed to invest in a heated tunnel space. These are some of our highest value crops. In a small market garden like this, it's important to identify what the highest value crops are and grow the right amount of those. Theoretically, if this is all we had to grow, or I should say all that we could sell, then we'd probably bring down our variety a bit because these pay back the most for time and space. But we grow a variety of other crops because the market demands diversity. But these are just some examples of the returns per linear foot that we expect out of a bed in these crops. And you can see ginger, which is a whole nother rabbit hole and topic, outperforms the rest by a long shot. We invested in a high quality Rimmel greenhouse to have as a propagation space. The first 2 seasons on the farm, we relied on purchasing in transplants from a nursery nearby. But we found that with this investment in the infrastructure and our own tools, we are able to have a much more reliable and steady source of higher quality transplants and plugs than we were purchasing in. So rather than listing everything that we transplant, it's more simple to say we direct seed all of our root crops, most of our cut greens and herbs, so think cilantro, arugula, basil, spinach and lettuce mix depends on the season, but we're leaning more and more towards transplanting those. And then other larger seeded crops like peas and corn. And then everything else we transplant. So we're quite transplant heavy. And while there's a bit more work on the propagation end than if we had more direct seeded crops, we find that the time in the ground is extremely important. So time between transplant and first harvest is critical in a small space so that we can get quick rotations in and anywhere between 3 and 5 crops in a bed in a season. This big table here is just an example pulled from our propagation plan. So we have crop, succession number, variety of the crop, so kale, winter boar, our estimated seeding date, so we aim for sometime within whatever week that is, and then number of days to transplant, so we can plan when we need the bed ready by. It gives us an estimated transplanting date, and then we base different crops' needs on, or I should say, different crops require different sized cells. So we have soil blocks, larger, longer lived, or crops that live in the transplant tray for longer go in 36s. We have 72s, 60s, And then for smaller, quicker crops, we use the wind strip trays for maximum space efficiency. Typically, we plant expecting 80% germ. So these numbers over here, for this succession of onions, for example, we determined we would need 2 flats of 72 if there was 100% germination. But because it doesn't always go that way, we buffer in a little extra so that we don't inadvertently have too few plants, and so we can also be choosy about planting the best of them. Again, bed management. Here's the picture. Talked through this a bit, but it's quite simple. For root crops, we remove the crop and the residue by virtue of harvest. For cut greens and things like lettuce and bok choy, and even bunched greens, kale, collards, those types of things, after our final harvest, whether it's a single pick or multi-pick crop, we'll go through and cut the plant out just below the surface, leaving the roots intact to decay and feed the soil food web in the ground. And then add a bit of compost on top. We only add 6 inches at establishment, and then it's about 1 to 2 inches annually after that to maintain. Similar thing for longer lived fruiting crops such as peppers, tomatoes, cucumbers, squash. We remove those by cutting them just below the soil surface, and then often we find we can plant into it that very same day. Just a few weeks ago, we harvested 3 beds of cabbage, got it all cleaned up in the manner I described, and by that afternoon I was direct seeding spinach that is now looking beautiful. Our irrigation setup is simple and modular and mobile as well, which I think is very nice. We can take runs of irrigation and easily move them around the farm or adapt them to different needs. Most of the production is in overhead irrigation, and we found a little hack that we can have more control over the irrigation by putting a little valve between the wobbler and the stem, so that if we only need to irrigate half the field going linearly, then we're able to accomplish that. We have drip irrigation in the tunnels, mostly used for the crops that don't prefer to get wet leaves, so the summer crops, tomatoes, cucumbers, etc. And we utilize the drip year-round, though we do have overhead in the tunnels as well to encourage germination of some trickier crops like carrots in the winter. We operate from a well that runs water to the whole farm without any issue, and we had a backup pond dug this previous spring with multiple intentions. One is wildlife recreation, being able to swim and take a cold dip after a hot day, but also in an emergency situation, having a very large reservoir that we can irrigate out of in a pinch. And just this fall, in two videos prior to this one, I outlined that we were automating the irrigation in the market gardens. So you can find more information on that project in that video. Our approach to fertility in soil is really ecological in nature. So putting down the compost as the growing medium and mulch is essentially rapidly building habitat for a healthy functioning soil food web to develop quickly. By putting down compost, we're radically altering the organic matter composition of an area, and our goal is to build up humus so that we can increase the cation exchange capacity and increase how available nutrients existing in our soil profile are to the plants. Ultimately, we still are amending with different organic fertilizers, mostly depending on bone meal and organic chicken manure, but also use some micros that are context specific based on our soil tests. And we're continuing to adjust pH, though we probably are getting close to being done adding calcium lime. And we do this so that we can be consistently producing this food now, but with our approach, this should go down significantly in the coming years. Our dependence on external inputs in a high output system will never be zero, but our goal is to build a healthy, functioning soil food web that we can demonstrate how active the biology in our soil is and see that in the health of the plants, the vigor of the plants, and our yields. So while this will never be zero, reducing our need for external inputs is the goal. We also create some of our own mixtures on the farm. This is a recipe for a liquid biofertilizer that's an anaerobic biological inoculant that can be easily made using cow manure and some things that are often sitting around on a farm. I won't go into this so much, but it's an active fermentation process that creates a very high quality, shelf stable biofertilizer that can be applied to annuals, perennials, trees. Yeah. I mentioned a bit earlier about cover cropping. We mostly cover crop in the summer and the winter. So in the summer, we use teff, millet, buckwheat, alfalfa, and sun hemp, depending on our goals. Some of them are more rapidly growing and can create a active mulch in place where we plant into the crop residue. As you can see with this buckwheat, Zach is crimping between the summer squash. Teff and millet and some of these grasses or poaceae plant family cover crops are really wonderful for their rapid growth, ease of termination, and that, again, we can plant directly into that residue or apply compost on top for direct seeded crops. In the winter, we use annual rye, crimson clover, oats, and peas, and have found really tremendous results in our yields the following spring. So we're able to get, as I mentioned, 3 to 5 crops in a bed in a year and take downtime in the summer, as well as downtime in the winter with the field production going somewhat dormant. And that's while including cover cropping into our annual plan to build soil actively through photosynthesis and plant roots. Weeds and pests are definitely a seasonal issue here on the farm. It's interesting that the seasons we rely most upon also have the heaviest disease and pest pressure, so spring and fall. And this also will continue to improve as the soil biology complexifies. However, we do use some protective mechanisms for controlling outbreaks so that we don't lose crops to pests and diseases as much as possible. So for pests, caterpillars, we spray BT. We've utilized nematodes diluted in water, a specific type of nematode that targets flea beetle. We also use insect netting and are increasingly doing so for spring and fall planted Asian greens and Asian brassicas. Kaolin clay is a wonderful solution to give cucurbits a head start at transplant stage. So it's a fine clay that you dilute in water, and it essentially coats the plant in a surface that prevents cucumber beetles and squash bugs from overly damaging young plants so that they can get a head start and establish. And then finally, part of the beauty of such a small footprint is that it's not a ridiculous task to go out and hand pick different pests off the plants. You see on the right here's a diseased kale leaf, which we deal with. We also have monsoon-like rain events in which the soil becomes fairly saturated for extended periods, and that's when our disease pressure skyrockets. We attempt to preventatively treat using Serenade and Regalia. These are both organic biological fungicides that help increase the plant's resistance to different pathogens. And I say all this to say, essentially, we're actively playing a role in mitigating weeds and weeds and pests and diseases acutely. And the system is building in the redundancy of, as the plants are feeding the soil food web, the insects and diseases won't be as prevalent in future years because the plants will be so vigorous that they don't require as much inputs for control. We harvest everything by hand. Some photos of us bunching carrots, getting some arugula, picking beautiful giant bunches of spinach. And our post-harvest area is very simple. It's in an old RV carport built onto the side of the barn that was here when we arrived. So it's open air, and we have a simple wash table with a pressurized nozzle on a foot pedal to take dirty root crops. We also try to grow as many crops in a manner, and the no-till facilitates this so that washing is minimized. So oftentimes our greens don't have to be washed. When they do, we utilize very simple solution, just Johnny's salad spinner. And while it's a small and low-tech option, we found that we prefer it to investing in mechanized bubblers and spinners. We deal with all the food waste and vegetable debris in a number of ways. So there's very little food waste because we sell almost everything that we harvest. We also all eat and have access to loads of veggies ourselves for things that come back from market. One of the beauties of having pigs in conjunction with a market garden is there's truly no waste, as they'll eat down any scraps you give them. There's this pig. I love this picture, watching them. They love the Napa cabbage more than anything. And then our pastured poultry operation produces a lot of bedding litter from the brooding stage that we remove from the brooder at the end of each season and create windrows using this. So this is essentially pine shavings, untreated pine shavings mixed with loads of high nitrogen poultry manure. And it actually works out to a wonderful ratio between the two. And then we use that as a base material to incorporate veg scraps and create our own compost for perennial systems around the farm. Our wholesale outlets, or rather our sales outlets thus far in the life of the farm have been wholesale and retail. So we have had really excellent partnerships with a variety of local food access nonprofits and for-profits that have had funding to buy in local food and either sell it or distribute it at a very reasonable or no cost to the end consumer. We also are diversified into several farmers markets. We have a growing CSA program and encourage on-farm pickups for folks willing to come this way. And I should just say quickly, we've not leaned too hard into one or the other. Thus far in the life of the farm, the two have been about a 50-50 split in terms of revenue. And with federal funding drying up for these food access programs, there's these organizations are largely under duress in ways they weren't when we started the farm. So because we have retail outlets already established, we are in a position to replan going into next year and facilitate more retail sales of the vegetables. We take pride in our market booths being beautiful and some of the most diverse at market, and have weekly, very regular routine drop-offs and deliveries for our wholesale outlets. So we have a very predictable schedule that facilitates harvest schedule and wash pack schedule in the gardens as well. We take really good care to track and keep data of all of our harvests so that we know the seasonality of different crops, how much they're yielding at each pick. So I pulled out this example from this summer of our sun gold tomatoes. Our first harvest was on June 13th, and this was just 3 pints, very small, as you'd expect for a first harvest. And you can see it gradually ramping up to more consistent production. And we can also, further down in this sheet, see where it drops off. And we can do very easily calculations to understand, okay, how many weeks is a plant in the ground like tomatoes before it gives us 80% of its total yield? And how long does it take to give us that last 20%? So rather than doing guesswork and just leaving plants in the ground as long as they'll stay alive, we can do the arithmetic and determine, well, yeah, we've gotten 80% of the yield off of this crop in only 60% of its lifetime. So it's actually more economic to pull that crop and get it growing into something else. This is a tool called, I can't recall the name of the tool. I'll drop it in the comments. Airtable. It's called Airtable. And it is a very useful tool for tracking this data, though it could be done in a free resource such as Google Sheets as well. So to talk about the financials of the market garden, we've standardized everything on the economic side of it. So we refer to a bed unit as 50 linear feet of bed. So in our tunnels, for example, we have 100-foot beds, and each bed is 2 bed units. In total, we have 130 bed units across the market gardens, and our base target for each bed each year is $1,000 for each bed unit, rather. So you can simply do the math there. Our base target revenue is $130,000 out of just over half an acre market garden. And we base our crop decisions on that. So not every bed will yield $1,000, or bed unit will yield $1,000 through the year. However, certain high value crops can compensate for lower value crops, bringing the average to a baseline of $1,000 per bed unit per year. This is a breakdown of our sales this year. 34% retail, 66% wholesale. So wholesale was big this year with the funding that was available, and next year this will probably be flipped, about 66% retail, 33% wholesale. So some of this is projection because we're still in 2025, but I thought it'd be relevant to show how we keep track of our income. So between markets and invoices from our wholesale partners, we can easily plug in market garden revenue each month and learn exactly what the highest revenue months are on the farm for the market garden. Essentially, to project November and December, I took the percentages of 2024 and applied it in reverse to get us a projected number for each of these months out of the gardens. So this is taking it one step further. We have each month, the revenue per month, including these two extrapolated values. And then we also track expenses diligently, not just expenses in general, but by category. So we can see at any point on the farm how much we spent on the market garden in April, for example, or how much we spent on the broilers in July, for example. And this is a very useful planning tool, not only to budget for future years, but also to have an active profit loss idea for the month so that we know exactly how much money is coming in, how much money is leaving, and what the bank balance should look like based on that. So these are just direct costs. And what I mean by that is it's not factoring in labor. So these are just materials, seeds, tools, equipment, investments that are direct materials and running costs for the gardens. And I wanted to put together a labor model to demonstrate what the labor would cost on this So based on our experience here, I put this together to demonstrate about how many people are required to manage the garden space each month, how many hours per person that month, and then what that looks like on a week to week basis. So, for example, one person could manage all the gardens in January for 30 hours a week. Or it takes four people 31 hours a week each in June. And at $20 an hour, this is the cost that each one of these produces. So the total labor cost in this model, which I think is more relevant than going into detail about our compensation, which I've also outlined in a previous video, this is a good base model for folks to operate from and adapt. And this final sheet takes that into account. So we have our income from the first table, direct expense from the second table, and then labor per month in the third column here. And we can see it changes the P&L, or the net revenue, each month a bit in our context using this model. But we are cash flow positive, and by paying 20 people, or by paying $20 an hour for the required labor in the market gardens, the enterprise directly profits $26,000 after paying management and crew in 1 year. Here's some basic capital expenditures. I think budgeting $3,000 for high quality tools. I think it's better to invest in a high quality broad fork, bed rake, tilther, and buy it once so that you don't have the headache of going cheap and having a tool that doesn't work as well as you need. A walk-in cooler and CoolBot, an 8x8, can be purchased for $5,000. I think budgeting $5,000 for a covered wash pack. This can look a lot of different ways, and cost will depend on existing infrastructure, but the gardens also cash flow so well that even if you have a very simple setup to get started, think under fold-out tents, for example, it wouldn't be very long in the life of the garden before a more robust system could be invested in. And the rest are just budgets based on our experience to get started with the very baseline required capital expenditures. Part of our success in the farm so early has been our ability to create a good working environment and retain our employees for 12 months out of the year. So we take time to have group lunch every day. When special things happen, like this beautiful orange watermelon, we enjoy it together. The crew and all of us enjoy the diversity of activities on the farm. It never gets monotonous. Some mornings by 9 a.m., any one of us may have moved the chickens, turned on the irrigation, harvested lettuce, and you're over washing carrots and planning the sheep move, all first thing in the morning. And our folks have articulated to us that that diversity of tasks is one of the main draws of staying here. And being able to pay people year round, even when work is lighter, is another major thing. It's quite challenging for farms to retain good employees when they're unable to offer employment for 12 months, because it creates an awkward chunk of time for that employee to find alternative employment, and the expectation for them to come back in the following spring can be unrealistic. So planning enterprises and planning revenue to enable that is something that I think is extremely important for the longevity of a farm. So this is just a bit about our context. We pay ourselves as owners $2,000 a month. It doesn't sound like much, but bear in mind, in a farm business like this that's combined with our home space, our personal running costs for living expenses extremely low. The farm pays for the rent. Most of our driving is done for the business, so gas bill is really low. We produce almost all of our own food, so our personal living expenses are very low. We pay our manager the same and provide housing and utilities to that person. And then right now we have 2 crew that are each paid $13.50 a month, and they also get housing, utilities, internet as part of the business overhead. So while we are able to offer a good competitive compensation package for everyone working here, it does bring up the overall farm overhead significantly. And the overhead in managing all the enterprises and just the basic land and infrastructure cost can bring overhead quite high in our context. So our goal moving forward isn't necessarily to refine the direct costs on each enterprise, because each enterprise directly is quite profitable. It's to learn ways to either increase revenue in other ways or find creative ways to continually bring down overhead cost without compromising on things like compensation or quality of life. So in our context, these are the things that have worked really well. It was extremely quick to build up. In just 1.5 seasons, we built out these market gardens sequentially and got it into a place by year 3 where we could be expecting $130,000 plus of gross revenue out of a very small space. We grow enough crop diversity that we have resilience baked into the system. I mentioned it earlier, but bringing in intentional downtime throughout the season. So in our context, we like July and the bulk of winter to be quite a bit calmer on the workload, enable us to take trips, spend more time with friends and family and recreating and not working so hard 12 months of the year. Our gardens are extremely low waste, as I mentioned, and any waste is brought back into the system through animals or creating compost. And it pays back on its investment and is part of our strategy of enterprise diversification. So having diverse enterprises buffers in significant resilience, where if a batch of broilers doesn't perform as expected, we're still generating significant revenue out of the gardens, or vice versa. If we have disease pressure and some crop failure, we're still selling loads of high value protein into the community. So it's part of our strategy for diverse enterprises making a robust farm economy. What we're improving is automating more systems. We opted to go with minimal automation to get started, partially the cost of it, but partially learning our systems and learning what we like, where we want permanent elements of the gardens to be before making it permanent and making the investment. Wash pack efficiency and layout is something that we're focused on going into winter this year, because a lot of our time is spent in wash pack, and while our system is effective, there's always room to improve. We're starting to plan on growing more storage crops for the winter so that we can generate significant winter cash flow out of the gardens without battling the seasons and working with so much crop protection, and moving towards more retail sales, as I mentioned. And finally, probably a year from now, we'll start seriously looking into phasing out the caterpillar tunnels and going with more permanent, more robust greenhouse or high tunnels that have heating, so that we can really control climate in there and consistently get the best quality crops year round. Thanks for watching, folks. I hope this was helpful. Just wanted to take the time to share our journey and some of our numbers and what the back end looks like for the market garden on the farm. If this kind of video is helpful, please let me know, and I'd be glad to continue a bit of a series outlining the other enterprises and how they all play into the whole farm economy and ecology that we've built here at Wild East. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.